Classroom of the Elite Season 3 Episode 9 is here, finally finishing up Volume 10 along with starting Volume 11, which is the final special exam to end off the first year. And in terms of cut content, we're off to a pretty decent yet somewhat concerning start. You guys will understand what I'm talking about later in the video. Though that's only talking about the cut content, because my god, did this episode look horrible. Like, it's genuinely hard to believe that such a popular light novel ended up with an adaptation like this. But let's not focus on that and dive into all the cut content and changes for this week's episode. Starting with the Arisu meeting. When they meet up, Arisu first apologizes to Kyo and tells him that she had no choice but to target him because someone high up ordered her to expel Kyo. Though sadly for Yamagod, he was the one who ended up getting expelled. And the reason is because he tripped her up during the mountain special exam. Arisu tells Kyo that the exam was originally going to only allow classes to send criticism votes to other classes, and there wasn't going to be any reward like the protection point, which would make it extremely easy to target and expel any student from different classes, letting Kyo know just to what extent he was being targeted by someone high up. But the first year teachers, especially Mashima, who is the first year class A teacher, fought against the new chairman for the students and managed to change some of the rules. Arisu also talks about how Yahiko ended up with one less criticism vote than what she had expected and wonders if Kyo was the one who sent him that praise vote, to which he replies that he did. He says that he knew Katsuragi was a red herring, so he sent his vote to Yahiko even though he knew it wouldn't change anything. Then we finally have the entrance of Tsukishiro, and let's just say his entrance was way more menacing in the light novel, plus the wonky animation did not help the intensity of the scene at all. Also, another major difference during this scene is that when Tsukishiro kicks Arisu's cane, Kyo manages to catch Arisu and stop her from falling, which leads to him getting hit with a punch from Tsukishiro. The anime just lets Arisu fall to the ground for some reason. Though I wouldn't be surprised if the reason they did this was because it was too complex for the studio to animate. I mean, Tsukishiro choking Ayanokoji genuinely looks worse than the season 3 trailer. It's literally like that meme of flirting versus harassment. This adaptation is truly something special when a highly anticipated scene looks worse than the pre-animated trailer. But with that, we're finally done with Volume 10, and now we move on to Volume 11. The volume starts with a monologue from Arisu, which was completely skipped in the anime. We also get a flashback, which they have to show at some point because it's really important, so I'm not going to talk about the flashback. During her monologue, she talks about how she completely disagrees with the White Room and she believes that it's impossible to create an artificial genius. She thinks that a person's potential is determined the moment they're born and there's nothing you can do to alter that. She also believes that even if a student of the White Room turns out to be exceptional, it was because of their DNA and not the product of White Room's teachings. That's basically all I can tell you guys about her monologue without going into important stuff that's likely gonna get shown later in the anime. Then we move on to the second chapter of this volume, which was, once again, completely skipped in the anime. We get a flashback to when the class vote special exam was being discussed by the faculty members, where we see Mashima trying to convince Tsukishiro into changing the exam, talking about how it's unfair for the students to be forced to expel someone just because none of the first years have been expelled so far. After their discussion, Tsukishiro talks about how they're planning to hold a school festival next year, where they're planning to invite politicians, journalists, and people who know about the White Room, which, if you put 2 and 2 together, means that Papa Koji might be coming to school once again. After the entire meeting is over, Chawashira calls Mashima and Hoshimiya sensei to talk about how they feel about the new director and the unreasonable special exam. After that, Chawashira and Hoshimiya start fighting over whose class might be class A by graduation, and Mashima mentions that they shouldn't involve their personal feelings into their class and hints that something happened during their student days, which is why Chawashira and Hoshimiya have beef with each other. Then we finally have something that did get adapted, and that is the announcement of the special exam and its rules. If you guys didn't understand what the exam is about, it's basically each class picking 10 events to participate in, 5 of them being bluffs, and during the day of the exam, the school will randomly pick 7 events out of the 10 real ones both classes ended up choosing. And the commander of each class decides who participates in what events, and how the commander can influence each event depends on the rules of the event. And that's basically the special exam simplified. There are obviously a lot more rules and details if you're interested, but I'm not gonna bore you guys with that. Though the anime completely skipped on what the rewards for the exam are. Basically, you get 30 class points for every event you win at, which gets subtracted from the losing class. And the class who wins the most events gets a bonus 100 class points. The LN also shows us the current class points of each class, and as you can see, depending on the result of the exam, Class C can either end up reaching Class B or they might end up going back to D. After that, we move on to the lottery to choose your opponent. When Kyo came as the leader, Shabashira was surprised that he volunteered himself and was happy that Kyo might take things seriously this time around. Another thing the anime cut out was the fact that there were 2 computers in the room they choose their opponents, and those computers are going to be used by the commanders of each class so they can assign participants of the events from there. Also, the commander can only give instructions to 1 participant per event, but aside from those things, the scene was pretty much the same. Now we move on to the K scene. First up, he asks her about what the strengths and weaknesses of the girls in the class are so he can make plans for the exam, along with asking her about some other stuff about the class. Then we finally have Kyo giving her the necklace. One difference during this scene was that Kyo was genuinely thinking that Kei hates the necklace and was planning to get her a box of chocolates instead. It's actually quite funny that even the White Room masterpiece was oblivious to Kei's tsundere antics. Moving on, another thing the anime cuts out is multiple scenes of people trying to talk with Hirata, but he never responds to anyone and always looks depressed. Slowly, day by day, people stop trying to talk to him, and even Horikita tells everyone to leave him alone. And the only one who hasn't given up on him is Mi-chan, and she continues to try talking to him every single day. And the reason he shouted at her was so she could finally leave him alone and let him be. They also cut out Koenji's reaction to all this drama, and this man does not care at all and wonders why there are so many problem children in the class. And Kyo thinks about telling Koenji that he's one himself, but decides not to do it. Moving on, we get an Ayanokoji group scene where they all discuss about a lot of stuff about the exams, along with feeling bad for Kyo that he's basically forced to be the commander. And Kyo is really glad that everyone doesn't know that he actually wanted to be the commander this time around and intentionally chose Class A as the opposing class. After all this, the anime skips multiple chapters and puts the Manabu scene and Class A's event reveal in this episode. I am genuinely hoping that they are rearranging this stuff instead of straight up skipping multiple chapters, though the Manabu scene does have some cut content as well. First up, Kyo genuinely failing to imagine Horikita being a person who smiled a lot. Then Manabu talks about another thing about Suzune that was completely different about her and says that it's gonna be his final metric to see if Suzune truly changed or not. Another thing is Manabu's words about Horikita having a really big impact on Ayanokoji that definitely should not have been skipped because it's a massive turning point for his character and making him realize something really important about himself. And that is all the cut content for this week's episode. Leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, check out some of my other videos, and consider subscribing for more Classroom of the Elite and just anime content in general. With all that being said though, have a nice rest of your day and hopefully see you guys in my next video.